Okay, so Morgan and I did our number talk in the first grade. Our content standard was that 10 can be thought of as a bundle of 10, and then our learning goal was that I can add and subtract groups of 10. So going into the number talk, I kind of thought that we would maybe do some sort of handout with the problems on them, or just tell students like, oh, this is the problem, like 80 plus 10 equals what, and then just have them think and then just share out. We ended up doing, and then I also thought that maybe doing something under like the document camera. But we ended up having students get their whiteboards out, and then we would verbally tell the problem, and then we'd write the problem on like the big whiteboard, and then have students write the problem on their whiteboard, and then show their work, and then we'd kind of walk around and check whiteboards, and then call on a few students to share out what they got and then how they got their answer. So I did the first number talk problem, Morgan did the second, and then we kind of tag teamed the third. So I told students the problem is 80 plus 10 equals what? And then I wrote it on the board, and then when students were finished solving the problem, they like would give me a thumbs up. And then I called on a few students to explain, like, or to have them explain what the answer they got and how they got it. And so a lot of students said, I know 8 plus 1 equals 9, and then I added the 0 back in. Or some students had on their board, they had 8 slashes, and then they did like a little plus, and then they added one more, which shows like they did a bundle of 10 instead of the dots. Some students did do like 8 dots, and then they added 1, and then they added the 0 back in. So that's what a lot of students' thinking was for the first number problem. And then Morgan led the second number problem, and while she was talking with the students, I was walking around and seeing what students wrote on their boards. So the problem was 70 minus what equals 40. So for this one, a lot of students were saying that they know like 3 plus 4 is 7. So then obviously 7 minus 3 has got to equal 4. Or some students said they did it on their fingers. They had 7 fingers, and then they took away how many to get to 4. Or some wrote like 7 sticks, and then they took away some. One thing that I learned was that when we were asking some students how they got a problem, they just had wrote, like, for example, for the first number problem, the answer was 90. So some students just wrote 90 on their board. And so when we asked them, like, oh, how did you get 90? They just said, oh, I did mental math, because this was kind of more of a review for them. The next day they were having their test, so they were like, oh, this is easy, like, whatever, I used mental math. So the first 2 kids that said they used mental math, Morgan and I were like, oh, awesome, like, no big deal, whatever, that's great that you used mental math. And then the third student, Miss Brandstrom, was like, okay, like, great that you're doing mental math, but what are you doing in your mind to get to that problem? So that kind of made us think, like, oh, like, we should dig into, like, they're using mental math, but are they doing mental math correctly? Like, what are they doing in their minds to get that answer? So I think that was one of the biggest things, like, moving forward, is that, and like my biggest takeaway is that you should really dig into like what students are thinking. Like, if they just wrote the answer on their board, like, how did they get the answer? They don't have to like always show their work, but like at least explain, like, I did this and this to get to 90, that's why I just wrote 90. Which is fine, they don't always have to show their work, but if they, as long as they can explain how they got to where they did, totally fine. And then just also digging into the mental math comment. Obviously that's great that they can do it in their minds, but like, it's great to share how they got mental math, or how they got to the answer using mental math, because, you know, they're still doing math in their head, but they just need to explain it. And then another thing that I learned is I loved using the whiteboards. I thought that was really awesome. But I think next time like flipping their boards up to show what they got. So like if someone's explaining what they got, they can kind of have their whiteboard up and then kind of like do a little pano just so all their peers can see how they did it. And then with that, like when a student is sharing how they got their work, having them like maybe stand up and then have the whole class listening so that they know like, oh, this person used this. And then when the next person shares, you can be like, oh, they used a different strategy, but like they both got to the same answer. So it's still like you could use this or you could use this and both work. So just digging into like how students got their work and just sharing to the class so that their classmates can learn from them. And yeah, their classmates can learn from them. They can use a different strategy. And then it's just showing their verbalizing how they got from point A to point B. So yeah.